Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Alec Cooley. I'm a senior advisor here with Busch Systems, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's program. This is part of our periodic Busch Systems periodic green thinking webinar series. These are all programs all designed for sustainability and facilities professionals working on waste and recycling and diversion topics. And so we, as you know, we have a number of different topics over time. Oftentimes, they tend to have a focus on behavior. How do we design programs and the way infrastructure is set up to get people to actually participate with diversion programs? With today's, we're actually going to step back and we're going to look at what happens once things go into the bin. How do they get moved through the process? What happens to materials after they get collected, and how do we do that more efficiently? How we design that back of house system, having the right equipment, ensuring there's enough space for dumpsters, training housekeepers, selecting bins for ergonomic considerations. All these are critical factors, not only in having in operational efficiency, but also health and safety, as well as maximizing waste diversion. So there's a lot of great practices out there that we're going to be learning about with today's program. Next slide. I'm particularly excited for today's program. We've got an excellent panel with some great experts who I have tremendous respect for and have a huge amount of knowledge. So we're going to start off with a presentation from Claire MIFLIN, who is a principal with the consulting firm ThinkWoven, as well as an executive director with the NGO Center for Zero Waste Design. Claire is going to sort of walk us through that back of house process, reviewing some of those design considerations, best practices as waste travels through those different steps between the bin and the back dock, as it were. Then we'll follow up Claire's presentation with another case study from AYODEJI OLUWALANA, who is the Waste Reduction and Recycling Program Manager at Penn State University. Ayo is going to talk about how he works with their custodial system and how do they train folks, how do they engage custodial to be part of a team and part of helping to make that program successful at Penn State. And then finally, we'll have KERSTIN Meyer, my colleague here at Busch Systems, who's with our sustainability team. She's an advisor with our team, and KERSTIN is going to talk about some of the considerations with bin design for front of house bin design, but how do those influence factors that about operational efficiency? So not necessarily what are the best practices for getting people to use them, but things like ergonomic considerations, fire safety, all those factors that should go into selecting bins. She's going to give us an overview of some of those factors. So if we can go to the next slide. As always, we encourage as much interaction as we can with the webinar format. Everyone's lines are obviously muted, but if you have questions specifically for the presenters that you would like them to answer live, go ahead and use that Q&A function and type those into that section. If you just have comments, things you want to share, you want to chat back and forth with their attendees, put those into the chat function. So just making that clear distinction. Questions that go into the chat may or may not get noticed. So if you want them actually to be responded to, make sure they get into the Q&A portion. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Claire MIFLIN with ThinkWoven and Center for Zero Waste Design. And Claire, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Alec. Great to be here. So yeah, I'm Claire MIFLIN. I head up the Center for Zero Waste Design and the consultancy ThinkWoven. I believe waste is a design flaw. I mean, natural systems are circular. They don't create any trash. And we could similarly design circular human systems. Admittedly, there's lots of incentives to consume more things and create more trash that we need to work against. And so the nonprofit center does that. It adapts strategies that we developed within the Zero Waste Design Guidelines to the context of other cities. It expands the database of case studies and develops research and policy tools for designing cities and buildings for zero waste. And then on the other side, ThinkWoven consults with different types of entities of different sizes. They may be managing existing buildings and campuses or design teams for new developments. And the earlier we get in, the better, to really ensure systems are designed to reduce and better manage waste, and at times to achieve true zero waste certification. So what's my background? I'm an architect. I was working in very sustainable architecture, zero energy, solar panels, rainwater regeneration. And I was moderating a panel with Urban Green, that's a local USGBC chapter here in New York City. I just designed this 75-unit residential building with the firm I work for. And they were talking about the city's new organics program, which is collecting food scraps in these small 20-gallon bins, because the Department of Sanitation in New York City lifts everything by hand into its trucks. And I'm like, how does that little 20-gallon organics bin fit into this building's waste system? We had 3 chutes with a refuse room on every story, with a chute for trash, for the metal, glass, plastic recycling, and for the paper and cardboard recycling, so that porters didn't have to go to every story. You know, even if there was another chute, we couldn't put a brown bin of 20 gallons at the bottom of a chute. So there was just no solution. It hadn't been thought of. The city had just rolled out a program that makes sense for 1 to 10 family buildings, but doesn't make sense for multifamilies. And so that made me think, well, every architect can't figure out how to design a system themselves. We need these zero waste design guidelines. And luckily, I don't know, everything flowed for me at that time. We got the mayor's office involved. We got funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. The American Institute of Architects got behind it. And we got the Department of Sanitation, Transportation, Housing, developers, architects, designers, to all come together over a year and develop these guidelines. The team must have gone to 40 buildings to talk with porters, to follow the path of waste from where it was thrown out at the bin to where it got collected, and saw all these friction points along the way. And even that building I'd designed, I realized the interlocks were not put into the trash chute. So when he removed the bin, sometimes glass hit the floor. There was no ventilation in the waste storage room. We'd done these really big elongated tree pits for stormwater, but that meant there was no place to set out the bags. We hadn't done a good job designing it. We really hadn't. But I would never have known had I not gone back to do these zero waste design guidelines. So part of my effort is educating architects to think it through, but we also work with existing building management. And this infographic is at the core of what I'm going to talk about today. Like, how do you plan for better waste management? And it's not rocket science. It's very straightforward, but you have to think in incredible detail. You have to think through, how is the waste thrown out? How is that bin at number 1 designed? It has about 2 seconds to tell you which place to put which waste. People don't spend a lot of time reading signs. So how well designed is the waste station? How is it moved in number 2? Do they move all streams together in that one dolly, or do they pull one stream at a time? All these things make a difference in terms of how the procedures to keep things separated for waste. Then do you have enough storage space in 3 for all your waste types? Because if there's not enough space, things that are separated will not stay separated. And then how's it collected? And have you made sure that there's a headroom if you have a compactor or whatever is needed? Is there space to wash the containers? So this is kind of the core of what a person needs to think through to make sure the facility is going to be able to manage waste in an effective and efficient way. So say we're starting a new project, we always start with code regional requirements. There will be requirements maybe for separating certain types of waste. And it may be determined, like in New York City, commercial organics requirements started with the biggest generators and then have been trickling down to every generator bit by bit. Are there minimum square footage requirements like in San Francisco? So we'll look at the regulatory requirements. And then we'll look at how is it going to be collected, because knowing if it's going to be on a roll-off compactor or a front load bin or has to be done by hand, as was the case in New York City for pretty much every multifamily building, unless they had the roll-off. You have to think, how is it going to be collected? And what are the trade-offs between individual bins versus the roll-off in terms of space and access? Because there are considerable height requirements, like 23 foot for your roll-off container. And then there's the truck access that has to be figured out. Like, can the hauler's truck actually come and reverse and pull off that truck and get out again safely? So then you really need to know how much waste is there and of what types. So the best thing, if it's an existing facility, is if you've had an assessment of your waste generation, and not just how much trash, recycling, and organic waste is collected, but actually an audit which tells you what the composition is. Because at that point, we'll look at, are there opportunities to reduce waste? Like, if there's a huge amount of disposable cups in there, could you make sure your cafe had reusable cups? Like, if you had the dishwashing capacity, for example, or can you have policies to reduce printing, especially single-sided, to reduce the amount of paper? Like, can you do things to reduce waste first? And then, like, estimate what is your capture rate? Because our clients want to improve their waste management to get closer to zero waste, and to get to divert more waste. So you don't want to design a system that works just with the status quo, but it should be able to work if you really improve your recycling and organics capture rate. Will you still have enough storage space? Would you need different types of equipment? So we really look at both the current and the future performance. And when we developed the zero waste design guidelines, we developed a calculator for new buildings for if you didn't have that information. So you could really look at how much space you'd need. And you can get to this. This is our homepage. You can get to it by clicking on the strategies tab. And I have a little video here which shows, if you click on the strategies, you get to both the zero waste design guidelines themselves and the waste calculator. And then you can choose a commercial building. You put in, say you have 1,000 office employees and you have a restaurant in the building that maybe has 50 employees. This is using data that's all shown. It's like nationwide. It's actually from California data, looking at the generation, and you'll see how much storage areas are required. You can reduce generation if your generation is less, say you're not printing or you're doing stuff to reduce food waste. It will suggest certain volume reduction equipment. Here, a trash compactor container is strongly recommended. But actually, if we go back and change the capture rates for my future scenario I was talking about, like if we capture a lot more than 29% of our recycling and organics, as we're showing here, if we get that up into the 80s, then our recommendations for volume reduction equipment will change because there's less trash. It's not necessarily that you would need the roll-off trash compactor container there. So you can select the different compaction equipment. If you do a cardboard baler, it reduces the storage area. It changes the output of cardboard to show it in bales rather than in containers. And you can kind of play around with that to see how you could reduce the storage area. You can just choose single stream recycling if need be. You can change the containers and see how the required storage area changes. And just play around with it to see how you can optimize in your building space, equipment, and collection. And so that's freely available. When we actually consult on projects, we typically use an Excel spreadsheet version of this, but it has the same functionality. Sorry, wrong way. And so this is a kind of graphic we'll show. This is a new campus for a university here where it's looking at they're looking at like, do we want to have all this compaction equipment? So we're looking at, well, if you have to store 2 days waste between collections, if it's uncompacted here, it's going to be 1,740 square foot. Whereas if it's compacted, even including the footprint of the equipment, you're going to be down at like 660, about a third of the space. So since you're building a new building and that space is expensive, the payback for those compaction equipment is very short. And we will calculate that at times for our clients too. And then planning for movement. So much of our waste is moved by hand in tilt trucks or dollies. Like, make sure you have the door widths necessary. If you can use a larger container, then that means it's fewer trips. So just moving from a 36-inch to a 42 or double door can really make all the difference in making your movement more efficient. So we always look at that as well. And not just horizontal movement, you have to look at the vertical movement. I mean, as we saw earlier, that could be a chute, or often recycling is taken in hampers down in elevators. You may have lifts. And then this one on the right is a personal favorite. It was a case study we did when we looked at the Hearst Tower in New York City, which has a restaurant on the mezzanine and then dishwashing facilities in the cellar. And they actually designed in a 3-story dish carousel to take those dishes down a narrow slot to the cellar so they could use reusable dishes. So that is an example I use for architects about thinking in systems right at the offset, because that would be much harder to retrofit into an existing building. So this is the kind of thing we will look at, where we'll lay out, okay, there's different types of waste stations in food service spaces, for non-food service spaces. This is a facility that wants to be zero waste, so we're going to have reusables as well that are drop back for takeout for the students, so they can drop back their reusable cups just as easily as they can get rid of their waste. So ensuring those are spread through the plan, looking at where they are. Then we will look at the movement, like from the local waste rooms to essential waste rooms to the hauler collection, and looking at that process, from the recycling station, how it's moved, how it's compacted, then how it's after that. Is it moved in the toter? Is it drive-on tug? Is it tipped into a roll-off compactor, and the requirements for collection? So we'll just follow that process that we saw on that earlier infographic and design it into the plan of the building and show them what contingencies we have. It's always a balance between labor, space, and equipment, and collection frequency. And so you can play with those to get to kind of a place that works best for your client. And then the central storage room. This is a graphic we developed with Foodprint Group. They're a food service waste consultant that help hospitality and restaurants get to zero waste. They do a lot of the training side as well. We often help them with the actual design side of the facilities, but really looking at making sure your central waste storage room has space, and they always take their floors off, so it's really clear where those waste bins for the different streams go. Having space for regulated waste or vendor take back, like the pallets or the crates or the wine kegs, for example. Making sure there's a means to track the waste, like scales if you're going to track by weight. And then space for the compaction equipment like the baler, and needing to know the utilities for that too. And then just considering the workflow in that space as well. So these are considerations we'll go through on every project that need to be thought through. And we'll look at what kind of a compaction equipment you might use. And for food waste, there is just such an awful lot of choice. Like, some just grind it up and send it down the drain. Not the best use of a valuable resource. A pulper doesn't use much energy and creates an output that is just shredded and is pretty much compost ready, which we'd always like to recommend if you have composting on site. Dehydrator uses more energy, but you can really reduce odors and the volume of waste. And in New York City now, they're collecting food scraps once a week. It's a real problem for many facilities managers to store all the huge amount of residential food waste for the whole week. So in some projects, we're suggesting dehydrators to make it so much easier for them to manage. And then in the guidelines, we have case studies. ETSI headquarters was one of my favorite. That's a true zero waste certified facility. They only have central waste stations. That makes you able to do equal convenience disposal, which is one of our highest best practice strategies. Having all waste disposed in the same place means you're more likely to divert things. If you have a desk bin for trash and maybe recycling, but what about food scraps? They'll go in the trash, for example. So they really thought it through in ETSI, and they came up with a procedure for housekeeping staff too. So when they empty these bags from the waste station, it goes in the hamper. There's a scale in that hamper, and all the staff need to do is tap the tablet, say which waste they just put in, and they have software that shows the diversion rate, and they post it right by the bin to give that feedback. So people are like, oh, wow, we diverted 90% last week. We're kind of on track for our zero waste target. Italy is another one. This is a project that Foodprint Group, again, this was their project and their case studies. So they looked at providing front of house bins for food scraps, back of house bins. And this just shows how they make it super clear, the disposal procedure, laying out the bins on the plan, making sure the signage is super consistent in multiple languages. The front of house signage is kind of matching the back of house signage, which is a little simpler. Tape on the floor, because you need that cardboard hamper to go back in that place, because if it's put in the wrong place, then people will throw the wrong thing in it because it will be conflicting information. So the consistency needed to make sure things are designed properly so that they can be operated properly is really the most critical thing. This was another, I was on a webinar and the designer was talking about a study they'd done for waste at an airport where staff had to take the waste types from, they had 4 waste streams in the bins to certain compactor locations. And of these 17 locations, only 2 had equal convenience disposal. Only these 2 were locations where staff could tip out all the types of waste. Else, they have to go to multiple stations to get rid of all the types of waste. 8 of them are just trash only. So that is really design incentivizing the wrong thing. Because if you have to move all the way across the airport to dispose of your food scraps and then somewhere else to do the paper and somewhere else to do your recycling, you may not have time to do that. And we have to incentivize our staff and make systems easy, because these are staff that have really tough jobs, and we have to design to make it as easy as possible for them to do the right thing. And then here was another zero waste facility, but they did the zero waste process after occupancy, and the architects had, you know, it was a LEED platinum building. They'd done a great job on energy and other things, but they hadn't thought through waste. The dishwasher capacity was not sufficient, so they couldn't use reusable dishes and they had to use compostable ones. The waste stations they'd designed, they just had circular holes for each material type, and then the cabinet actually wasn't tall enough to fit the bins in, so they had to get freestanding waste stations instead. There was no space to store the waste containers. They had to build this after the fact, and even so, their waste bins are outside a lot of the time, and that's partly because the designated collection location was on a sloped street, so they have to change that and move them out. So really, it just creates friction forever if places are not designed right for waste movement. Oh, sorry, missed one. And lastly, this is a multifamily building in New York City that we were consulting on. I mean, the designers had the porters coming out the compactor room, going through the exit stair, and then down this corridor where there was a door in the corner, so they couldn't get a 1 cubic yard tilt truck through it because it would have to be turning at the time, and then to set out on the sidewalk as we do in New York City. So we just were like, could you not just put a door here so they don't have to go through the exit stair with these self-closing doors? every single time. Makes it so much easier for the porter. And we moved this door so it wasn't in the corner, but it was in the straight portion of the corridor, so you could get your tilt truck around the corner and then it can go straight through and it would fit through. So little tweaks. It would have been a lot of cost to retrofit that after the fact, but we caught it in design. So I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to take any questions later, and here's my contact information. I think Alex has also put it in the chat. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Claire. That was fantastic. There's a lot to unpack there. Lots of great information. One thing that really sticks with me is the importance of the consistency of not just thinking that it's being a front of house, but it's also how do you have a system that's intuitive for your custodians and others at back of house, and using the same color scheme to identify streams front and back. Having different colored bin liners, those are all part of how you keep the system simple for them as well. So shout out for that note.
Yeah, I totally agree. Consistency and coherence the whole way through is just critical.
Yeah. We have a live poll question, if we can pull that up real quick for everyone to see. For those of you who are actively, you are working at a facility or an organization with an operation, would love to get your thoughts. Have you done some sort of studying your waste stream, doing audits, measuring your generation rates? But have you done sort of understanding your system to be able to right size and redesign how that actual system works? And you can see a number of options we've put up here, from adjusting the placement capacity front of house bins to custodial service arrangements, et cetera. While folks are responding to that, I'll just toss out one question that for you, Claire, and this one's coming from Violet. What's the best collection equipment to maintain separation of waste streams during that back of house collection process? Is there anything you would recommend between the cart system and how you move that, as well as the evergreen question of how do we deal with bag liners? How do we minimize bag liners? Any insights on ways of getting away from them?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at that, and that facility I just showed you for that wants to be zero waste certified. Like, can we not have the liners? And obviously, tipping is going to be a big issue then. I mean, you could tip your Slim Jim of recycling into a dolly. And then what's happening with the dolly, that's a little harder to tip depending on its size. So then, making sure that if you compact them, using bin tippers, making it easier that you actually have a bin tipper to tip it into the roll-off compactor. So obviously it depends on the stream. I mean, we try, if possible, for recycling and paper and cardboard not to have the bin liners. But it's good then if you try and encourage people to empty any of the recycling as well, because liquid spillage can be an issue. But then if you're going to do that, make sure you have bin washers and things to make it easier for custodial staff to keep things clean and keep things working. I think that's a difficult thing to say. I mean, it just has to be discussed in terms of the staffing needs. And in terms of the best equipment, I think it's so specific. Your roll-off compactor is easy in terms of you get accurate weights from it. It's, you don't have to wash it frequently, but it takes an awful lot of space. And if you're trying to go towards diverting more waste, you may be kind of incentivizing trash if that's the easiest thing. So I think it's always a balance, and there's not one best container solution.
Yeah, that certainly matches my experience. I know simply the process of how when your housekeeping is emptying the individual bins into what you could contain. There's situations where I've seen it makes sense to have separate carts, and you're just emptying and you're keeping the material separate. Other times it's easier just being able to put the bags in, trash and recycling, as long as you've got a color-coded system and they're well trained. There's a clear how they're going to separate them on the back end. There's a lot of sort of those granular factors that can influence when and if that makes sense for a situation.
Yeah. And then going back afterwards and seeing what are the sticking points and if people are doing things wrong, why? Yeah.
Good. So just to close out the poll and just see some of the responses here. Looks like yeah, about 30% said yes to adjusting their placement of capacity front of house bins. Similar for custodial service arrangements, and a little bit lower for how things get transported to the dumpster. Yes to 32% back of house dumpster compactor arrangements, and 30% for changing hauler services. So interesting to hear. So with that, thank you, Claire. We're going to go ahead and transition to IO. We're going to hold. We have more questions coming in. I encourage folks to keep putting those in for Claire. We're going to hold the rest of the questions for the end and then come back to them. But in the meantime, let me hand it over to AYODEJI OLUWALANA with Penn State University to learn about how they works with their custodial crews at Penn State.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. That was a wonderful presentation, and thanks, Alec, for inviting me. Hello, everybody. My name is Ayo Oluwalana. I'm the Waste Reduction and Recycling Program Manager here at Penn State. And, I started this position close to 3 years now, and we've been doing a lot of work with our custodial staff because we value their role. Just a little bit about, I'm trying to move my slide here. Oh, there you go. So just a little bit about Penn State. Penn State is a land-grant university founded in 1855. We have 24 campuses spread across the state, with the main campus, the University Park, that's in State College, Pennsylvania. And we have over 33 million square footage facility, and it's the main campus is huge. And we are R1 institution. We have over $1.33 billion annual research expenditure, and we're a global leader in research, education, and community. We have roughly around 88,000 students and around 28,000 plus faculty and staff full-time. There you go. So I just want to quickly talk about our waste reduction and recycling program. My position here is based in what most people call facilities department. That's the Office of Physical Plant, but I work closely with our Office of Sustainability. So in other campuses, my role is housed in the Office of Sustainability, but I'm housed in facilities, which is our Office of Sustainability. And talking about our waste management operations, our custodians are, responsible for indoor waste collection, while we have a solid waste crew, which, we are a serve-all university. They serve, they take all our trash and recycling, all around campus, to the landfill and also to the recycling center. In our Commonwealth campuses, the other 23 campuses all across the state, they work with local hours to manage their waste. Just really quickly, talking about our goals, number one goal for our program is to achieve waste reduction. And one of the ways we're doing that is through sustainable procurement policy. We're leveraging our procurement policy to be able to reduce what comes to our campus. Another goal we have is to increase recycling participation by at least 20% annually. And several ways we're doing that. We're training stakeholders, faculty, staff, students, visitors. We're doing that through engagement, through education, and also through outreach. And we leverage a lot on social media campaigns and also regular website updates. The third goal that we have is to reduce our contamination. I'm sure everybody that maybe you are in the university system, contamination is a big deal. We've set a standard for ourselves to reduce our contamination by 10% annually. And one of the ways, or two ways, major majorly that we're doing that is to ensure consistency with our waste and recycling station. And of course, Claire emphasized this clear signage is very, very important. And lastly, we're promoting an all-inclusive program where everybody's voice is valuable. Yes, I'm the manager for the program, but everybody's voice is welcome. And that way we have a joint ownership, not just folks in facilities or folks in the Office of Sustainability trying to make a change. Talking about our approach to waste management, Penn State's approach to waste management and waste reduction and recycling program is leveraging the systems thinking concept. I'm sure majority of you might have heard, that concept, which is very, very important to achieving waste reduction, robust recycling participation, and contamination reduction. And what does systems thinking really entail? According to the systems orientation, from curiosity to courage, it's a willingness to see a situation more fully, to recognize that we are interrelated, to acknowledge that there are often multiple interventions to a problem, and to champion interventions that may seem unpopular. Let's take an example, your vehicle. Say for example, your transmission is out, that vehicle cannot move. So if one element within a system is broken, then the entire system is useless. So again, that's how we approach our waste management, thinking about if one department is not doing is not buying into our goals, then we can achieve some of those goals that we highlighted earlier on. Just quickly also to share some of our program initiatives and successes. One that I really want to emphasize is GIS mapping of all our indoor waste stations. I have an intern. I'm a one-man office, but I work with multiple stakeholders. I have an intern that we engaged last summer, and he went out to document all our waste stations in the building. And as you can see, the bottom right corner, each building was able to place where all those stations are. It took pictures, shows where exactly those waste stations, what they look like. And in addition, you also, when you go into the map, you'll be able to see the signage. You'll be able to download those signage. You'll be able to see the frequency, of tipping, the contact information of the custodians and all that. Just like a one-stop shop for to be campus friendly, to be user friendly, excuse me. And that's one of the ways we are also engaging to ensure that everybody, buy into the program. Another initiative that I would like to talk about is, the development of our custodial sustainability team. When I started 3 years ago, custodians were just doing their job, janitorial work, but I found that, based off of my previous experiences working with custodial staff, majority of them are willing to support the type of program that we run, but unfortunately most institutions don't give them the voice. And so when I started 3 years ago, I said, custodians are ally and they need to come to the table. So I started off with a town hall listening summer meeting, just for me to learn what they are seeing in their respective buildings. And based off of the feedback they give me each year, I go back to work with the feedback. And every year at the next annual meeting, I report back on exactly what I've done with the feedback. And that way, they were very engaging. They were able to, really, there was transparency. There was, this collaboration, so to speak. And as a result of those, feedback, we were able to, set up a custodial sustainability team. And this particular team represents, each district, which I'm going to talk about later in the future slides. They form the core of our custodial sustainability operations within custodial operations. Another thing that I want to talk about, we're working on right now, or we're wrapping up, is the rebranding of our signage. Prior to 3 years ago, we have this random blue and white because that's the university's color. what we found out that, their signage wasn't really working, was not really doing the job. It was just, people are so used to it, so it wasn't really connecting any longer. So we decided to completely rebrand that, and that really was a game changer. And I must say this, the suggestion for us to color code our sign actually came for our custodians, which is really amazing. Another thing I wanted to mention is our compost facility upgrade. We have an on-site compost facility. It's kind of getting obsolete, but now it's a windrow system, but now we are moving to a static aerated pile system. And one interesting thing about the compost program is that the students actually were so interested in composting a lot on campus, but we in facilities, we do not have the funds to be able to do the upgrade, right? So we told them, like, if you really want this upgrade, we need support, and different clubs that are really interested worked with their student body, and they asked us to submit a proposal, and they funded the project. Was cost $3 million, but they funded almost 80% of that budget. They awarded a $2.3 million just for us to be able to upgrade the campus facility from the student fee board. Another thing I also want to mention in terms of our successes, it's Beaver Stadium. Beaver Stadium is the fourth largest stadium in the world, third in the US, and it's a 110,000 capacity stadium, and it's so hard to be able to manage programs a crowd size like that. But we've been able to really work on different initiatives, one of which is zero waste president's tailgate, zero waste president suite initiative, where nothing in that president's suite goes to the landfill, or they're all diverted. Another initiative is our bowl cleanup diversion program, where all materials within the bowl are sorted into recycling and trash. And also, just last football season, we implemented a program called the Pom Pom Collection Program. So when pom poms are given out, the shakers, they're given out to fans. We have a diversion program where we stage people at different entrances at the stadium to collect in the pom poms, and that way we're able to reuse those pom poms all throughout the season. Those that are bad, we send them to the recycling center to be able to recycle them. And of course, lastly, the Tailgate Ambassador Initiative. These are dedicated students, volunteers that go from one tailgate lot to another to engage fans on proper, recycling at the tailgate lot. And the last initiative I wanted to mention is also the strategic engagement that we have with our university's partner rights sponsor, which is PepsiCo. We've established a wonderful relationship with them to support some of the initiatives that I've mentioned above. Okay, so quickly, let me also talk about, just an overview of our custodial operation, especially at the main campus. We have over 430 custodial staff, and they manage about 300 buildings with 14.5 million gross square footage. And our custodial staff, they are broken down into 14 districts, about 264 in the first shift, 147 in the second shift, and 19 in the third shift. And our custodians, they are responsible for general cleaning and waste removal. Specifically, they manage only centralized and common spaces waste stations. They don't do office space waste removal. We stopped that a couple of years ago. And tipping, frequency at those centralized locations depends on the building. Some buildings we do 3 times compost pickup. Some buildings we do two times recycling pull up, and in most buildings, or as needed, we do 1 time trash pickup. And another thing I wanted to mention is our blue cleaning guide manual. This is kind of equivalent to what most people call the green cleaning manual. It is a guide that it kind of incorporates environmental friendly products best practices to keep our campus employees safe, kind of instill environmental responsibility as our custodial value, and help us kind of measure our green, processes. So now let me talk about how can we empower, custodians for a successful waste reduction and recycling program, which is very, very important. Like I mentioned earlier on, why do we need to empower custodians? Why do we need to empower them? Custodians, I believe, at least from my experience and for the results we've seen here at Penn State, they are critical to any successful waste diversion initiative. You can't do it alone. You need, the support of the custodians, and you need to be able to empower them. And that, they are also strategic allies, to engage in creating solution that works and lasts. For most of us that manage the program, we always think that we have all the solutions at hand, but guess what? Most of these custodians, when you talk to them, when you empower them, you realize that they are so full of knowledge because they interact with these waste stations more than any other person. So they know what will work, and what will not work. And they have this vast knowledge and broad, based knowledge, of, the solutions. And of course, empowering them increases their sense of ownership, in the waste diversion program. Like I said, I'm a one-man office, but I work close with our custodial staff, and also make sure that I empower them, to just also let them know that we are all in this together. Yes, I might be the manager, but you play a critical role, in the scheme of things as well. Talking about training, and engagement. One of the things that like I mentioned earlier, when I started, one thing I started, when I started at Penn State, 3 years ago, I actually prioritize, when, just to listen listen to the custodians, provided them with the opportunity to be able to express themselves. And, they came up with different ideas, different, problems and solutions and how we can solve them. And like I mentioned also earlier on, one of the things that I've done with this annual summer town hall meeting is whatever feedback they give me at each of the, town hall meetings, I go back, work with them. And every year, we usually have these town hall meetings every summer. I go back the following year and say, hey, this are the things you mentioned last year. This is what I've done with them. And guess what has done? It has actually created this huge, sense of collaboration, this huge sense of trust, listening that, someone like me listens to them and they feel like they can actually contribute more. Another thing we do with respect to training and engagement for our custodial staff is we've made it a point of duty to, during new employee orientation, we want to ensure that the custodians or, all of them during their orientation understands also the goals of the waste reduction and recycling program and how they fit into the scheme of things. And that has also proven very, very successful. It's actually helped to, build a process. It has actually also helped, shape the culture and the behavior. And, it's been very, very rewarding to see that our custodial staff have, they've taken ownership of the program. Like I also mentioned earlier on, our custodial sustainability team, this core team, we have 2 representatives from each district on this team, and they are the highs and years of the recycling program at our university. They come up with solutions. We come together as a team and we break down, okay, what do we need to do? What are the common problems in all the buildings? How can we solve these problems all together? And that alone has actually given these custodians this sense of responsibility and ownership. Talking about another way we've empowered them, I as a manager of the program, I have the opportunity to guest lecture in classes. I work with professors in some courses to talk to the students about the program. And one thing that I did last year was actually to bring our custodians, about 2 of them, to one of these lectures. And guess what happened? The class was supposed to be, I was supposed to present for 40 minutes, But initially, at the beginning of the lecture, I gave them the opportunity to talk to the students what they are seeing in the back of the house, and just talk to them about contamination issues. And at the start of that lecture, it was one question after the other being directed to our custodial staff from the students, and that really, really showed that this was something, there was a disconnect, because to the students now they see that, oh, there are actual real people managing this waste, and that really influences their behavior going forward. Because I got some emails from students after the class saying that, thank you for bringing these custodians to this class. Now I think I'm more aware that this is a big issue, and even for the custodial staff as well. It was an eye-opening for them that most of the students don't even know. So again, just to ensure that we are empowering our custodians, now the students can actually go to them in their respective buildings and ask questions directly if they have any, unlike, having to wait, email me and having to wait for an answer. Another thing that we've also done or we were doing, we started this last year, is to have our custodians visit the recycling center to actually let them know what is acceptable in the county's recycling stream, so that they can also feel empowered to also talk to the building occupants when the need arises. So talking about challenge, I want to talk some of the challenges that we've encountered. One of the major challenge, because we're a heavily unionized university, because of some of the tasks that some of the custodians potentially do, we run into union issues, and there's a thin line between adding extra tasks to custodial job. But what I have been doing, is to ensure that they are aware that whatever initiative they are being part of is actually going to make their work less stressful. And also, it's just a way of, contributing to humanity for a healthy planet. Another thing is also lack of understanding of proper sorting process. So usually this occurs when a custodial staff, maybe a temporary staff, is actually filling in for another one in a particular building, and especially if they are not familiar with that particular building, we normally see some discrepancies in the processes and procedures that we have already set in place, and we are working to address that. And talking about opportunities, I think with the model we've been working on, we feel like this will enhance continuous custodial engagement and recognition. Actually, this year we are thinking of actually working with our point right vendor and to set aside a recognition program to highlight the role of our custodians in our programs. And another thing we'll also be doing is also to spotlight our custodial staff across campus. We call this spotlight Face of Sustainability in Custodial Operation. And again, it's just a way for us to engage and also let them have that sense of ownership, in the program. And talking about lessons, we have learned and some advice. One of the lessons is just continuous training is very, very important. Like the town hall meeting we do every summer, it's a must. It's usually between May ending and August. Just give us, when the school is over, we'll kind of debrief on what happened during the course of this academic year. What do we need to do better going into new academic year? We do regular trainings. Continuous training is very important. Building custodial operations leads to positive outcome. I think I can overemphasize that. Having them, take ownership of the program always, and we've seen that, it has actually led to positive outcome. And of course, adaptability is key in large and diverse facilities. Our campus is huge. It's really, really huge. So we are not kind of, stereotyped. We have this, flexibility to be able to adapt to whatever situations, we need to fit into. And my advice would be to, if you're running a program like this in your university, foster strong relationship with your custodial team. Very, very important, because if you do it all by yourself, you're going to struggle. Custodians, back of the house, janitorial staff are huge assets to any waste diversion program. I can't overemphasize that. And of course, being transparent about the challenges and involve all stakeholders in solution is very, very important. Like I said, I'm a very transparent, open book person. I don't miss words when I tell them this is what I'm struggling with. What do you think? What's the solution? So again, these are just little advice for someone hoping to adopt what we've done in engaging and empowering our custodial staff. And with that, we'll turn it to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ayo. As a couple of people have mentioned, the chat, I think, can't emphasize enough the importance of the point that you're making of how you engage custodians and making them part of the team. Not only your eyes and ears on the ground and have insights that you have no way of knowing when you go home at 5 o'clock, but cultivating them, making them feel part of the team is huge, just to making sure the system functions, that they feel that sense of ownership is huge. So it's great to see the system, the program that you guys have done there. Great. If we can click over to another slide. I don't have another live poll, but I love having some of the interaction in the chat. So I just have a couple of questions here that would love to hear folks or see folks just share your own experience. Are there examples beyond just general training? How else have you engaged custodians along the lines of what I was referring to, or other examples? Or another question would love to hear folks engage with is how has input from custodians, how has their insights actually helped to improve it? Are there things that you've made changes that that directly came from input that they had given up front? So encourage folks to go around some of your experiences in the chat. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip a question for now. We're going to hold and come back and just do all questions at the end, Io. So if I can now introduce my colleague, KERSTIN, you want to come up here, and KERSTIN Mayer from Busch Systems, I'll let you tell us what we should know when it comes to just selecting indoor bins with an operational perspective.
Thanks, Alec. Yeah, hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is KERSTIN Mayer. I'm the Sustainability and Waste Diversion Advisor here at Busch Systems. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to discuss how to optimize your bin features for operational efficiency, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying what kind of things should you look for when you're purchasing your front of house bins to make your back of house program run a little more smoothly. Went too far. Okay. So there's no shortage of bins on the market, as I'm sure you guys all know, and they all have different features that impact the operational side of your program. The right bins can streamline waste and recycling removal, reduce the labor and the physical burden on your custodial staff, and avoid unnecessary costs, which overall improves the overall outcome of your program. So with that in mind, it really all starts with planning. And on theme with what we've been talking about today, one thing you'll hear me emphasize over the next 10 or so minutes is how critical it is to involve your custodial teams when you plan these details. These are the people servicing the bins, usually daily, so they'll often have that firsthand experience, potential pain points that you may want your program to address that you may not have considered. A good example I like to use of this is placing a large bin in high traffic areas. On paper, it might make a ton of sense that you put a bin that can handle a larger capacity in your busiest areas. But in practice, the weight of that bin can, especially when full, can create a daily servicing headache and a health and safety concern for your custodial staff. So I encourage you to collaborate with your teams so you can make sure that your program and your bins are addressing all of your needs. So with that, let's explore some features that promote operational efficiency and some convenience for your program. Starting with capacity, there are a few things to consider other than just volume of the container. The frequency that you plan to service the unit and the composition of the waste streams are also big deciding factors here. So for example, a slim 23-gallon unit, oh, sorry, I'll just go back here, might fit well in like a compact office space, but in a cafeteria that would quickly overflow. Conversely, and like I mentioned, a large bin in a cafeteria may seem like a great idea, but if you're collecting compost, the weight of that waste collected can get pretty high pretty quickly once the bin is full, creating a health and safety concern for your custodial staff who have to service and empty the bins. So we have to find a balance between a capacity that's appropriate for the location and the traffic, the weight of the waste being generated, and the frequency of servicing your bins. Portability is another feature we can consider when choosing our front of house units. Depending on the space, custodial staff may require the ability to transport the bins for servicing or change their locations easily. In this case, bins that include integrated handles or wheels for easy transport might be the best option for your program. Like imagine a custodian trying to move a full bin without wheels or proper handles, right? It can lead to unnecessary strain and sometimes even workplace injuries. So discuss those pain points with your custodial staff and whether portability would make their role in the program more efficient or not. One thing I like to note, if you decide to move forward with wheels, or we call them casters, is to consider using a dolly, which is shown here. It's kind of a cart with wheels where you can place all your bins, or purchasing fasteners to lock bins that have casters. So here's another example of units that have casters. You can purchase fasteners that lock those bins together to prevent people from separating the recycling from the trash bins. Wheels make transport easy for both the custodial staff and everyone else. So finding a way to prevent those who are not a part of your custodial team from moving them around is also pretty important if you're going to consider putting wheels on your bin. A less obvious feature to consider when selecting your bins is the type of lid that it has. So some bins have a hinged lid, which can make it easier for your custodial staff to access the waste inside, but they're not always as pretty. And on the other hand, although bins without hinged lids can often be more aesthetically pleasing, they can sometimes create a less efficient servicing routine. So some lids have heavy and sharp, or can be heavy and sharp, and custodial staff often must find places to put them down when they're servicing their bins. So that kind of runs the risks of the lids being put down, them being damaged, and I've even seen lids put back on the wrong containers in some cases. So it's another great reason to consult your custodial staff. When you have lids with no hinges, they might be a headache if you've got a lot of things to service, versus the hinge lids might make it easier if you've, again, got a large amount to service. So it kind of depends on your program and how robust it is. Oh, keep going too fast here. All right, and just before we move on to the ergonomics, it's really important to discuss the design of your bin. Contamination rates are important for all of our systems or all of our programs, whether it's front of house or back of house. Oftentimes bins that are more neutral with limited signage are go-to because they're prettier and they kind of match the interior of our facilities, but they can be ambiguous and they have a lack of signage, which creates that contamination headache for your custodial staff and decreases our diversion rates, ultimately making your program less effective. So with that in mind, a great place to start is making your bin design as obvious as possible. Use standardized colors that people will recognize, like blue for recycling or green for organics. You could use restrictive openings that also guide users in the right direction, like a circle opening for cans and bottles. That's common to prevent larger items from being distributed or being discarded in there, or a larger opening for your waste streams that kind of allow for a more variety of trash to be put in. We also want to consider adding signage to your bin that clearly communicates what's accepted in each stream. So we recommend a mixture of pictures and words, not too crowded and large enough that it can be seen from 10 or 15 feet away. A well-labeled bin can help users identify the correct stream at a glance, which improves your diversion rates and reduces the burden on your sorting crews. So this can also include adding labels that can be seen from the side and not just on the top. Okay, so we'll move on to more ergonomic considerations, which is something that's often overlooked, but especially going back to our custodial staff is critical for their health and safety. So the first ergonomic consideration we'll explore is accessibility. There's different types of accessibility to consider when you purchase your units. There are the standards and best practices for design that impact how people interact with your units, which is what I like to call more front of house accessibility. And then there's the back of house accessibility, which impacts how your custodial team interacts with your units and how they're serviced. So for today, we'll focus on the back of house accessibility and consider how bins will be serviced. So as I mentioned earlier, any waste collection bin, especially those that collect heavier waste types, can impact the health and safety of your custodial staff during servicing. So lifting and wrestling heavy bags out of the bins can be really physically taxing. So it's important to select bins that make this as easy as possible for your custodial staff. Units where bins are open from the top and bags of waste are lifted out are called top loading units. They may not be a problem for your staff if you only have a handful of units being serviced and they don't generate a lot of heavy waste, but these types of bins may not be ideal for larger facilities with many units to be serviced. So if you do opt for top loading bins, I recommend looking for those with liners that are more accessible. So for example, here at Busch, we have liners that hook onto the side of the unit, making it easier for custodians to access the waste and replace any bags. And if you do want to avoid top loading units, then you would want to be looking for ones that are more front loading, which essentially just means that they have a front door that can be opened and waste can be removed. So some units have liners that slide out for easier servicing. And we even have a unit whose liner tips on like a 45-degree angle. So you can kind of pull the waste bag out to the side instead of straight up. So depending on your facility and the needs of your program, it's always a good idea to speak with your custodians about servicing panes so you can look for bins with accessibility features that address those specific things. Liner design is another thing that you may not have thought to consider when you're looking at bins, but it can be important. So rigid liners provide structure, they make handling easier and cleaning more convenient, but they can also add weight, which especially when your streams are filling up quickly. Conversely, big bins with hooks for suspended liners and bags are lighter, but they can also be trickier to manage and take a little bit longer to replace. So we need to kind of weigh the ergonomics with the efficiency. My recommendation is to look for systems that make your custodial staff's lives easier. There are plenty of options out there with different liner systems, some of which are easier to use than others. So ensuring that you're asking the right questions when you're looking into bin design can make an impact operationally. Okay, one of the last things we'll look at here is fire safety. Fire safety is something we receive a lot of questions about, and it's not really well known. So we'll just have, we'll take a few minutes here to go through some fire safety. So if you're outfitting a large facility, it's worth reaching out to your local fire marshal for guidance before you purchase, since fire safety regulations do vary from place to place. There's usually two main considerations when we're looking at fire safety, and it's the materials compliance, and then the second is the placement of the unit. So for materials, understanding if the materials used in the bins you are selecting are fireproof or fire resistant is important depending on the regulations. More often than not, selecting bins that are metal or steel means that they are fire resistant, but then there's other things to consider, like whether or not the lid is made of metal or whether you have a plastic liner inside. Placement is the other thing we want to consider. So sometimes local regulations dictate whether or not we can place things in large areas or in hallways. So again, in these instances, it's always best to consult your local fire codes and understand how they're enforced by your fire marshal. Working directly with that fire marshal, and especially for those large purchases, can prevent any potential compliance issues. Okay, so here's a few examples of metal bins, and you can see a few here have more of a plastic lid. So again, understanding if your needs are fireproofing, fire resistant, things like that. Okay, so there's many different ways to create an effective waste diversion program, and it varies widely from organization to organization. Some of the best practices we like to recommend include conducting a needs assessment to evaluate what's pressing pain points that you would like your program to address are, alongside pilot testing to make sure the bins that you selected are a good fit before outfitting your entire facility with them. By starting small that way, you can identify potential issues before making a large-scale investment. Equally as important is collaborating with stakeholders. So again, custodians often have valuable insights into what will work and what won't. So make sure you include them in your planning processes. And finally, while aesthetics can be important, they should never trump your operational needs. So with the right research, you can find bins that look great and perform well and kind of strike that perfect balance. All right, so that's it for me. Hopefully that provided some clarity and insight into how bin design can impact your back of house program and what important features to look for so you can ensure operational efficiency for your program.
Great. Thank you, Kirsten. Lots of great information there. Yeah, so Claire and Io, if you want to turn on your cameras as well, we'll go ahead and we've got a number of questions that are coming in while we have some time here. So let me start out with a couple. There have been a number of folks with questions and also making observations just about the design phase. Claire, you referred to this in being able to influence sort of what's going into new building design to make sure the space and all the considerations are there. And there were a couple folks in the chat who pointed out that they may not have the direct experience as an architect to know what are the things that you're looking for. What are some of the key things that when you are if you've got access and permission and you're part of that design review process, are there quick, easy things that are sort of your checklist of you want to make sure that you're looking at from a back of house operational perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that. We were looking actually, it kind of ties in what the guidelines are for the waste information the architects have to show to what you're reviewing. And really, there should be kind of clear guidelines and a checklist. We did the zero waste plan. We were sub-consultants for the city of Hoboken, and on their requirements for architects, it was like ridiculous. They were saying they had to calculate so many cans, and they had individuals. They didn't have the recycling stream. It was given by weight, like the amount per occupant. So for them to calculate volumes of each waste type was really difficult. And then the reviewers obviously didn't look at it because it was kind of an impossible calculation. So having clear guidelines that say this much volume of waste will be generated per occupant or per square foot, and you have to provide that much storage, makes it much easier for who's reviewing it to review it. So I say first, setting up the review criteria, giving the architects guidelines for what they're meant to be calculating, and then just working through, like, where's the waste disposed of, how's it transported, where's it stored, how's it collected, is there access for the collection vehicles. Those are the kind of simple things, really following that waste management plan. But I think the first step, I think it makes sense if someone's going to be reviewing a lot of plans to come up with some really good guidelines and make sure that architects can follow them, and then have a checklist, just as any other building inspector would have to have a checklist, what they had to check for.
Yeah, I certainly know of universities where the recycling sustainability team has worked with custodial. They've created sort of that checklist, and they can hand it to the architects every time there's a new building in that process. It's something they can hand over at the outset. But then to your point, it's if you're coming from an operational background, it's just walking through and sort of stress testing all the assumptions that they're putting into this. James had some great points in the chat about things that he's caught that beforehand.
Yeah.
Great. We have a number of questions having to just around the custodial questions as well. Matthew, so that for Io, for you or Claire as well, Matthew had asked, can you explain more about sort of your approach to the training and how you do that? Is it with video trainings? Are there do you use interns? And it's kind of from the perspective of you've got a large institution. How do you bandwidth? How do you engage efficiently to reach as many people as you can? Anything else you would add to beyond your presentation?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Of course, bandwidth is always a top issue. But what I'll probably say is, at least for me, what I've done is I always scheduled out, this training so that everybody knows that these trainings are coming. So that way I can plan my schedule, make sure that it's on everybody's calendar. And that way, that has actually really helped me to be able to handle this trainings. One thing we're considering this year is also to move some trainings to video trainings, like for during new employee orientation will be part of their onboarding package, where they will have to watch the video of our program and all that. That one I don't necessarily have to be there. And thirdly, empowering that's why we have a custodial sustainability team. So we meet every other month to do training. So talk about different topics. And so it's just like a train the trainers. So basically, whatever we discuss during the training, they go back to their various districts to disseminate that to the other colleagues. So again, it's just talking about emphasizing empowering people, especially the custodians, to be able to help you achieve the goal. So those are the three ways we've adopted, and it's been working. Of course, yeah, bandwidth is very important. It's a lot of work, but scaling out, ensuring that you leverage technology in terms of new employee orientation, and of course empowering the core sustainability team to train their other colleagues is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you do anything specifically accommodating different languages and addressing just turnover? Any other words of wisdom on how you address those?
Yeah. So fortunately, I've not run into that issue, but if that is the case, um, I mean, our campus is diverse, so I will just work with our Office of Accessibility. They have a good resources to be able to translate some of those materials, or maybe an in-person translator to be able to translate some of the things that I am, giving to the custodian that needs those languages. So we have those resources, but fortunately, as of now, we do not have someone that needs that wants those that fits into that category. But if that need arise, I will probably suggest, if you have in your university or in your setup, if you have an accessibility office, to tap into their resources. I'm sure they'll be able to help you fulfill those goals as well.
Great. Thank you.
And talking about, I think the later part of the question was talking about turnovers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, turnovers is inevitable, especially with custodial staff, but we just continue to educate. That's why, as part of our core process, is to ensure that every new custodial employee goes through this training, so that they know what the program is all about, and the expectations from them. So again, that way we'll be able to keep up and ensure that everybody's on the same page.
Great. We had a question that I think either of you might be able to address. It was from an anonymous person, but they noticed that their cleaning staff prefers using smaller bins or using bagged recycling, even though it's not allowed going into their dumpster in their case because of their hauler requirements. But they find using that makes it easier to throw it into dumpsters. Do you have any suggestions for bin styles or other systems for just handling that can both accommodate making that process of emptying things out more efficient, while also not simply shrinking things down to the size where you need to make more trips back and forth?
I could jump in and then Ayo as well. I mean, I just put something in the answer to the Q&A that, I mean, you just have to think of the ergonomics. If you don't want them lifting a heavy bin and tipping it, that's obviously bad. So can you have a bin tipper that they can use? I don't know how big the dumpsters are, but could you have a automated bin tipper so they can tip larger bins? Or can you have a height difference so you can use a tilt truck from a higher level and tip it into something lower? I mean, can't really think of any other possibility if you don't want a bag to make it easy for them to lift it and you don't want small bins.
Anything you would add to that, Ayo?
Yeah, I think KERSTIN kind of mentioned one of the things that I wanted to say. I think it's just for us, it's all about the ergonomics of the whole equation. I think the safety of our custodians is equally important to us, so we emphasize that. And also, we have a standardized recycling or waste station guideline. We are a source separated system, and the kind of we have a standardized bins that goes into all our bins, waste stations. So that way there's that consistency. And of course, ergonomics is also equally important. So we ensure that those key parameters are part of the choice of whatever waste stations we're going to be buying or bringing to campus.
And I could just add, I see in the chat there, Patty added, well, they could consider using a paper liner because that might be allowed in their single stream recycling.
It's a good one, actually. I don't know if I've ever seen paper liners, but it'll be interesting. I know there was a question in here from someone about reusable bag liners, and that's when the sort of like this holy grail. Could we find some way of getting a system that works using reusable bag liners? I know I've seen University of Oregon for a number of years has had a system using durable bags that are also they can be sealed so they prevent leakage. And I've also seen that at least a few years ago, Waste Management actually had a system set up and you could purchase waterproof reusable bags through them that were adapted to work for Waste Watcher or similar style bins. But if anybody else has had success with a reuse system, would love to hear that also in the chat. We are getting towards the end of our time. Let me see. There's another question. I think we'll go ahead and cut it off there. We do have more questions, but just in the interest of time, and some of these are getting a little more specific. For those who we've not been able to respond to, I will follow up after the program and where we can work with Claire and Io and Kirsten and just send some direct email follow-ups for specific questions. So if we can advance the slides, let me just a couple of housekeeping things going forward. As we pointed out, the recording and presentation slides for today will both be archived online on our website. In the next day or two, we'll be sending out an email to everyone who's registered. So if you had someone who had to drop away or you want to share this with a colleague, both of those will be available. And also just point out that we've got 3 years of an archive of these past programs on a whole range of topics. We did one last fall on centralized office collections, removing desk side service, taking bids away from classrooms, done K through 12, lots of different topics, and you can find the recordings from all those programs on our website for the directions you see here on the Busch Systems website. Next slide. Also, for those of you who missed it, just want to give a shout out. This is a report that Busch Systems, we worked with a number of other organizations, the Kirk College University Recycling Coalition, Zero Waste Campus Council, AYODEJI, to do the survey project last year of college universities on who's adopting centralized collection programs, what are some of the trends around bin standardization regimes. And also, we just published the report with those results back in October. You can find the report online. There's a lot of great information, including sort of lessons learned that different recycling zero waste managers shared about how you actually implement some of these programs. So I encourage you to check that out on our website. And then next slide. Our next program coming up in exactly 1 month from today, we'll be switching over and looking at Parks and Rec context again. We're going to have a couple of good presentations. We'll have somebody from San Francisco's Recreation and Parks Department talking about how they dealt with endemic litter and trash dumping in Dolores Park with a successful outreach and sort of redesign of their whole collection system. And then we'll also be hearing from the city of Austin's Parks and Rec zero waste manager talking about how they have designed their whole system for a 300 park wide system and how they organize that. So encourage you to join us again next month if this falls into your area of where you work. And next slide. While we're at, I also just want to give a shout out to, I mentioned Kirk a second ago. I know you're a board member of the College University Recycling Coalition. They have their own great webinar series that they do for the higher ed sector. And you guys have a program coming up later this month on alternative framing of waste reduction and diversion with presentations from Sac State and the Center for Biological Diversity. So I encourage folks to check that out on Kirk's website. And I think that gets us to the end. Io, Claire, Kirsten, thank you again. Lots of great information. We could always dive in and spend another hour easily on something like this, but there's a lot of good information. So thank you again for presenting, and we'll look forward to hearing what you guys are doing down the road in the future. Thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.